get to some of your messages in a moment on this. Carmine Mastrogiacomo runs CSM driving therapy for anxious drivers. Carmine with me now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Sonia.
Morning. So, interesting, isn't it, where you take your test? It can prompt a lot of stories, flashbacks, fears as to how difficult it was. And some people actually opting to learn and take their test in other areas because apparently it's easier. What do you think about that?
Oh, no, I completely get that. I mean, when I first started my career, I worked out of a test centre in Barnet in North London. And for those of you that know Barnet, it's sort of built on a hill. So it's hill starts all the way. You've got national speed limit dual carriageways, national speed limit country roads. And then you've got the other end of the scale where you've got like 20 mile an hour zones and width restrictions. So it's certainly more challenging in certain parts of the country. Comparing it to places like Scotland, where I think the pass rate in some of the test centres is like 84%.
It's interesting. Is that a good thing? I suppose you want to pass your test. But as Elliot said, our reporter there, if you're out in Basildon learning this morning, just at the tail end of rush hour, if you can do that and pass your test, then you're kind of ready for anything that the roads of Essex and beyond have to throw at you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't recommend going down through a bus gate, as Elliot mentioned.
Not that one.
Totally. And the thing is, I find, and again, from my experience of working from the Barnet Test Centre, anyone that learns to drive in or near a test centre where it is a bit more challenging, they tend to be quite a well-rounded driver, and it sort of goes in their favour in their driving career going forwards because they've experienced probably the worst of the worst.
Yeah, and roundabouts sort of came up as a reason. It's interesting you mentioned Barnet with the hills and then having the sort of urban areas, but then the faster country roads. And it's having that diversity of lots of different types of driving and different complicated junctions that I suppose makes it more challenging, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I think I've had a few pupils that took their test at Basildon when we went over in that direction. And I remember, and I'm not too sure if it's still on the test route, I'm pretty sure it is, but I think the Mayflower roundabout, where there's dual carriageways that join onto it, I think it's the A127. And I think as soon as you leave the test centre, you're in a 40 mile an hour zone and then it goes up to 50. So, yeah, absolutely. Those complex junctions and those higher speeds you need to have your wits about you when you're putting for your test.
I have to say, we often talk a lot about driving on this show and standards of driving. And, you know, we have a good old moan. You know, none of us are perfect drivers, but it does feel like the conditions, not just the road surfaces, but how busy they are and, you know, drivers' patience. It's tough driving these days, isn't it? It feels to be less pleasurable than it would have been a few years ago. It's quite a stressful experience. And obviously you deal with managing the anxiety. How do you sort of go about helping people settle their nerves when it comes to going on the roads? Because it can be a bit like the Wild West sometimes going out on the roads, especially around our parts.
Sure. Well, it's funny because we actually specialise in working with clients with full licences. So these are people that have passed their test and the stress of driving has got to them for one reason or another, and they feel that they need more support. But I remember when I was teaching learners, you know, you used to really have to spend a lot of time with them. First of all, teaching them how to drive, like the core basics of car control, and then moving on to understanding the road sense and hazard perception. But what I used to do is once they got to sort of test standard, and I always used to try and get them to a standard which was above test standard if I could, so that when they went to the test, it was just a matter of going there and ticking a box. What we used to do in the weeks leading up to their test, that's when I used to introduce them to a couple of the test routes that I might have been familiar with, like certain hot zones, if you like, or hot spots where they were a bit more challenging, like things like width restrictions and things like that. And even bring the pupil into the driving test centre well before their driving test, like weeks before, so they can sort of psychologically prepare themselves for that whole experience, because it is completely different. When you get in the car with someone completely different who you know is going to be sitting there watching you drive for 35 minutes or so, it's a completely different experience to when you're out in the car with your driving instructor.
Yeah, that's so true. And it took me 4 times, Carmen, to pass. And my driving instructor used to be so frustrated with me because he's like, Sonia, you can drive, you can do it. And then the moment you get in that test environment and that man sits alongside you with the clipboard, you just get too nervous. And the nerves really kick in for so many people, don't they?
Yeah, and look, I don't think you'd be human if you weren't nervous. Look, I think anyone, don't matter how long you've had your license for, if someone told you had a driving test the following day, I think you would be nervous on it, because it's different to other exams that you might have taken in your life, because you're normally sitting in a big room with loads of other people taking an exam, whereas on your driving test, you've got someone sitting next to you, you don't know them. Their job is really there to assess you, to check that you're safe to drive unsupervised. And it is a completely different, assessing environment, if you like. And look, whether you passed, you mentioned fourth time, Sonia, which isn't bad, to be honest with you, but whether you passed first time, fourth time, 10th time, look, everyone meets the same standard at the end of the day. But look, everyone reacts differently to being in test environments, so it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, well, I'll take that. I'll take that as a massive compliment. Thank you, Carmine. You can come on again. Carmine Mastrogiacomo there from CSM talking to us on BBC Essex about learning to drive. And actually, if you're an established driver, trying to cope with some of the anxiety of hitting the road as well. Because as we mentioned, we talk about it a lot. It is stressful driving around Essex. And it's not even just the sort of start or end of the day with the commutes and the school runs now. It is busy and there's loads going on and everyone just seems to be a little bit more impatient, and we have a load of temporary traffic lights thrown in for good measure, and it adds to the rising blood pressure. It's just all going on, isn't it? So it does feel like it's a more stressful environment. Interestingly for me, so I passed fourth time, and my driving instructor did used to get cross at me because he said, you can do it. And then we do the lessons to keep my hand in, ready for the next exam. Luckily, it wasn't huge waits for exams like people are having now, thank goodness. But he used to get frustrated because he said, as soon as in your lesson environment, you'd be fine. You go to do your test, you'd get really nervous. And I had the same examiner on my fourth time when I passed as to my first time when I failed. And I failed at the notorious Grinstead roundabout in Colchester, where I stalled on the hill as I was sort of approaching the roundabout, went to restart the engine. I'd put the handbrake on instantly, but what I hadn't done is put it in neutral. So when I restarted, it didn't quite go to plan, and that was a fail, which was disappointing. But the examiner who failed me first time round was actually with me on the time that I passed fourth time round. And he said a couple of things to me at the start of the test. And you know what? I think that totally mixed up, because it's what Carmen was saying. You go into that test environment, even if you can drive, the nerves just hit a little bit different. You're going into that centre. You may have an examiner, you may not. They've got the clipboard. You're thinking, what are they doing? Well, they had the clipboard when I was learning. I don't know if that's still the case these days, because obviously it's a long time ago. But just that sort of bit of small talk at the start of the test definitely put me at ease. And I think that was the turning point for me. So tell me about you. Where did you learn to drive? Where did you pass your test? Was it Basildon? How tough was it?